Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing growing calls to resign.
Israel is being controlled by a coalition of semi-dictatorial, fascist people.
Thousands of protesters took to the streets in Israel over the weekend. These were the scenes in Tel Aviv, where hundreds of protesters reportedly held signs reading "Ceasefire now" and "No more blood spilled." Meanwhile, according to reports, Netanyahu is furious with one of his war cabinet ministers. Benny Gantz, Netanyahu's main political rival, is in the United States right now. He's meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The trip was reportedly organized without Netanyahu's approval. Randa Slim is a senior fellow and director of the Conflict Resolution and Track 2 Dialogues program at the Middle East Institute. Randa Slim, welcome back to the show. Good to speak with you.
Good to be with you.
Let's start with those images we played off the top. Netanyahu and his government facing protests inside Israel. Now his main political rival is meeting with senior U.S. officials without the Israeli Prime Minister's approval. How do you interpret these events?
I mean, as far as the U.S. administration, there is growing dismay, dissatisfaction, lack of patience anymore with Mr. Netanyahu. They have given him plenty of chance to, in a way, get his act together to present a plan, especially for what happens after, especially on the humanitarian assistance, to surge humanitarian assistance. Gaza is on the verge of famine. We are seeing children dying from malnutrition and hunger. And this is all happening as the Israeli cabinet, led by Mr. Netanyahu, is preparing an attack on Rafah in southern Gaza, which now housed, more than around 1.4 million Palestinian refugees. So there is concern, but at the same time, as you have shown in your pictures, there is also concern among the Israeli public that this government is taking them nowhere. I mean, that there is no strategy, there is no way out of this conflict, that I don't think they will be able to kill their way out of this conflict.
Well, the protesters and the other political rivals in Israel are calling for early elections to potentially replace Prime Minister Netanyahu. I mean, is there any prospect that you see while this war is continuing of any kind of an early political solution, such as an early election, for example?
Well, I mean, Mr. Netanyahu still has enough support within the coalition cabinet. So it's not clear whether there will be enough of a group within the cabinet calling for elections. He's not going to resign. He's not going to call for election. No. He made it clear in his last speech that during war, it's not time for early elections. And so, the only pressure that's going to force change is going to be the pressure from below, public pressure. But still, you have a majority of the Israeli public, despite the picture you have shown of protesters, you have the majority of the Israeli public that supports the war, does not support Mr. Netanyahu, but supports the war.
So U.S. President Kamala Harris, she pretty forcefully called for a 6-week ceasefire over the weekend. It's a position they've made, but the way she did it, the tone and tenor of it was a bit more urgent. And the U.S. is dropping aid into Gaza. How do you interpret these events on the U.S. side?
As you just put it, it's a change in tone and tenor. It's a change in tactics, but it doesn't necessarily signal a change in U.S. policy vis-a-vis this conflict. And so, and this change in tone and tactic is definitely warranted by the scenes we have seen last week of 100 people killed while they were trying to get food. So again, it shows that more and more difficult for the American administration, despite Mr. Biden's support, unconditional support for Israel. It has become more and more difficult to get Mr. Netanyahu to act on demands by this administration, especially when it comes to surging humanitarian assistance. And that's why they are resorting to airdropping food. By the way, they dropped 38,000 meals. That's less than one truckload of food when Gaza needs 500 truckloads of food every day. Now they are thinking about a maritime channel from Cyprus. So the fact that they are resorting to these rather than, in a way, getting their ally, Israel, to open the borders, to let food through land, through land corridors, shows you the kind of dissonance, kind of gap that's growing between Mr. Netanyahu on one hand and the U.S. administration on the other.
A spokesperson for the U.S. State Department said today that a ceasefire and a hostage deal is on the table. It's up to Hamas to accept it. What's your sense of where these talks are, and what are the consequences of maybe not reaching an agreement on this by the start of Ramadan, which is next week, and what the key players have set as the target for a resolution on this?
I mean, this deal has been now in negotiations for the last 3 months. And so I think most of the elements of the deal are in place. There are still a couple of issues that have to be resolved. And partly it's Hamas. It's Hamas problems. I mean, Hamas have to answer a couple of questions, have to deliver on the issue of prisoners to be released versus hostages, and Israeli hostages to be released in terms of proportion of in numbers, as well as accounting of all the Israeli hostages. And I think given the war situation that is unfolding in Gaza, it's going to be very hard for Hamas to deliver a perfect accounting of all the hostages that are alive versus those that have unfortunately died. Now, if this deal does not come together in the next few days, there are going to be bad consequences. And I don't think the American administration has a plan B yet. I mean, they are really focused on getting this deal done. Hence, you see the ratcheting up of pressure by President Biden a few days ago, yesterday by Vice President Harris, today during her meeting with Mr. Gantz. But I don't think they have a plan B if this deal were to fall. And if this deal falls and does not come together, we are talking about a serious escalation, maybe a Rafah operation, and maybe a serious escalation on the Israel-Lebanon border.
Randa Slim, always a pleasure to get your insights on this. That's Randa Slim, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thank you so much.
Thank you.